The patient clutched the mobile phone with such sheer force that her knuckles had turned entirely white. It was 47 minutes past 11 at night when the paramedics wheeled her through the sliding glass doors of the University Hospital emergency room in downtown Chicago, following a severe pileup on the Kennedy Expressway. She had a badly swollen right wrist, a trail of dried blood near her left eyebrow, and only one desperate request before they could even insert the intravenous line. "Please, call my husband. He is the very first name in my contacts." Laura Henderson, the attending nurse, took the device with gentle hands to calm the trembling woman. As the screen illuminated, a notification popped up, and right beneath it was a wallpaper photograph of Andrew Mitchell. He was Laura's own husband. In the picture, he was warmly embracing a little girl in front of a pristine white house with the ocean in the background. Laura did not scream. She did not drop the phone on the linoleum floor. She did not look at the injured patient as an enemy. Instead, she felt the chaotic noise of the trauma center suddenly recede, as if someone had slid a heavy, soundproof glass door between her and the rest of the world. The patient's chart read Chloe Roberts. She was 34 years old, suffering from a minor wrist fracture, and had absolute terror in her eyes. She did not look like a clandestine lover. She looked exactly like a terrified wife, praying for her husband to walk through the doors. Laura's gaze drifted down to Chloe's left hand, resting on the thin hospital blanket. There, catching the harsh fluorescent light, was the second devastating blow. It was a white gold band, nearly identical to Laura's own, featuring a delicate, wavy line engraved on the inside. Andrew had sworn to her that he had commissioned that specific design exclusively for them at a discreet, high-end jeweler in the Gold Coast neighborhood. Laura placed the phone face down on the stainless steel medical tray and signaled to another nurse passing by the corridor. "I need you to cover room 4 for a moment, please." She walked down the hallway toward the staff break room without running, though her heart was pounding against her ribs. She closed the heavy wooden door behind her, leaned against it, and pulled out her own phone to dial Andrew's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice dripping with sleepy warmth. "Honey, is everything all right? I am at home waiting for you." Laura stared down at her hands. They were trembling just as much as Chloe's had been. Andrew was her husband. In his late-night phone call, he was perfectly pretending to be in their Lincoln Park townhome. And somewhere tucked inside that massive lie was a little girl whose smiling face Laura could not erase from her mind. Laura did not interrogate him over the phone. Her voice did not waver even a fraction when she responded, "Yes, everything is fine. I just wanted to check if you were still awake." Andrew let out a soft, breathy chuckle, the exact kind of laugh that used to bring her profound peace. "I will be waiting for you with a hot cup of tea. You have had a really long shift today, haven't you?" Laura squeezed her eyes shut for an agonizing second. On the other side of the break room door, in room 4, Chloe was still bleeding, frightened, and waiting for that exact same man to arrive and save her. Meanwhile, according to his own narrative, Andrew was sitting in their living room in Lincoln Park, waiting for Laura. "There is no need to wait up for me," Laura said softly. "I will probably get out quite late." She ended the call before he could stretch the conversation into more comfortable lies. She stood entirely motionless in the dimly lit break room, staring at the ghostly reflection of her own face in the glass panel of the coffee vending machine. She noticed a tiny drop of dried blood on her scrubs that did not belong to her. She scrubbed it away with a rough paper towel, as if that tiny, aggressive motion could somehow restore her sense of control over a life that had just shattered. When she finally stepped back into the trauma room, Chloe turned her head sharply toward the door. "Did you manage to speak with him?" Laura meticulously adjusted the white sheet over the patient's injured arm, smoothing out the wrinkles. "One of my colleagues will take care of notifying him. Right now, we need to take another set of X-rays and monitor that contusion on your forehead." Chloe nodded obediently, though her anxious eyes darted back to the phone on the tray. On the locked screen, a brief text notification flared up for a mere second before fading to black. "Do not say anything yet. I will fix this." Laura caught sight of it for just an instant. She could not see the sender's name, but she felt a cold knot tighten deep in her stomach. That specific phrasing did not sound like the frantic worry of someone reacting to a car crash. It sounded exactly like someone desperately trying to contain a massive, unraveling lie. For the following hour, Laura operated with her usual, flawless precision. She checked the intravenous drip, recorded the blood pressure readings, fetched crushed ice for the swollen wrist, and consulted with the orthopedic department. Not a single person in that hospital could have guessed that internally she was dismantling her entire marriage, piece by piece, like an inspector evaluating a house after hearing the foundation crack. Between the strong painkillers and sheer exhaustion, Chloe murmured something that caught Laura off guard. He absolutely hates hospitals, but he always comes running for the children. Laura did not lift her eyes from the medical chart. The children. Chloe offered a faint, exhausted smile, radiating the specific quiet tenderness of a mother speaking of her babies even while enduring physical pain. Noah and Victoria. Victoria gets so frightened if she does not see me the moment she wakes up. Laura's pen came to a dead halt against the paper. Victoria. It was the exact same name Andrew had playfully chosen for the imaginary daughter he claimed they would one day have together. At 6:20 in the morning, Laura finally finished her grueling shift. She walked out of the hospital with her scrubs hidden beneath a heavy winter coat and made her way toward her parked car. The freezing Chicago skyline was just beginning to catch the pale, icy light of dawn. Before starting the engine, she unlocked her phone and typed a single word into her search bar, a word she had never wanted to associate with her husband's name, Florida. Laura did not text Andrew on her drive home, nor did she call him to say she was on her way. She parked on their usual residential street, right beneath the massive oak tree that blanketed their windshield with brittle leaves every autumn. She climbed the front steps of their townhome slowly, her phone still illuminated with searches for flights to the southern coast. The Lincoln Park apartment smelled overwhelmingly of freshly brewed, expensive coffee. Andrew was standing by the kitchen island in his flannel pajama pants and a gray cashmere sweater, stirring 2 ceramic mugs as if this morning were identical to every morning they had shared for years. "I left some toast out for you," he said, barely glancing up from his task. "You look like you had an absolutely horrendous night." Laura placed her leather bag onto a dining chair and studied the kitchen table. Extra virgin olive oil, freshly grated tomato, thick slices of sourdough bread, and the specific blue mug he always reserved just for her. Every single item was arranged with a meticulous, quiet dedication that she would have previously interpreted as deep love. This morning, it looked strictly like calculated preparation. "There was a terrible accident on the Kennedy Expressway," she replied, keeping her voice entirely neutral. "A young woman. 2 small children." Andrew did not drop his spoon. He did not gasp or flinch. He merely took exactly 1 second too long to formulate his response. That poor woman. That single, suspended second permanently etched itself into Laura's memory like a dark stain on a white rug. As he seamlessly transitioned into talking about a supposed afternoon meeting with a wealthy client out in the suburbs, Laura stared down at his hands. They were the very same hands that had steadied her 4 years ago when they first bumped into each other near Millennium Park. Laura had just finished an exhausting double shift and, out of pure clumsiness, spilled her hot latte all over a set of architectural blueprints. Andrew was carrying under his arm. He had not been angry in the slightest. He had simply laughed, bought them both fresh coffees, and told her that even the greatest buildings required a little human error to keep them from feeling too sterile. That afternoon they had talked for almost 3 hours about Chicago's architecture, her impossible hospital hours, his growing design firm, and the way the light hit the lake in the dead of winter. Andrew had always seemed like a man built of calm, steady details. He remembered the little things she mentioned in passing. He asked questions without ever being invasive. He had walked her all the way to the transit station under an umbrella that was comically too small for the 2 of them. Exactly 1 year later, they married in a historic venue out in Galena, overlooking the rolling Midwestern hills. There was no exaggerated luxury to be found, just 38 close guests, rich red wine, roasted lamb, wild white flowers, and the mutual promise of a beautifully simple life. Laura had believed in that promise with a pure, unblemished faith. Then came the lazy Sundays at the local farmer's market, the potted plants crowding their balcony, the improvised late-night dinners when she came home, drained from the trauma ward, and eventually the heartbreaking months of testing, blood work, and tearful consultations at the downtown fertility clinic. Andrew was always right by her side. He squeezed her hand tightly when the lab results were negative. He constantly reassured her that no medical diagnosis could ever measure how endlessly he loved her. Now, standing in their warm kitchen, he slid her coffee across the marble counter, just as he always did. "I have to fly down to Tampa this weekend," he casually mentioned, taking a sip from his mug. "The boutique hotel project has run into some complicated zoning issues." Laura slowly lifted her gaze. Tampa. It was the exact same word that had excused so many of his prolonged absences. But this time, as Andrew turned his back to wipe down the stove, she noticed something entirely new. There was a second unfamiliar key dangling loosely from his leather keychain. It was small, silver, and bore a faded, scuffed paper tag where only a single letter was faintly legible. Laura did not ask him about the mysterious key. She had learned over her years in the emergency department that when a wound appears small on the surface, it is never wise to probe it blindly without knowing how deep the internal damage truly goes. That morning, she simply allowed Andrew to finish his coffee. She let him talk endlessly about floor plans, municipal building permits, and a supposedly critical meeting in Tampa that sounded far too rehearsed to be genuine. She nodded along in all the right places, but she was no longer listening to him as his supportive wife. She was listening carefully, as someone taking internal notes for a prosecution. When he finally grabbed his coat to leave, he left a bakery receipt on the table and pressed a quick, familiar kiss against her forehead. Before last night, that small gesture would have warmed her for the rest of the day. Now, she felt the crushing weight of a monumental lie physically grazing her skin. She waited precisely 10 minutes after the front door clicked shut. Then, she walked straight into his home office. Andrew's workspace at home had always been an oasis of organization. There were pristine architectural models, neatly stacked tubes of blueprints, heavy samples of natural stone, and a vintage brass desk lamp he had bargained for at a weekend antique market. Laura pressed the power button on his desktop computer, her hands feeling like blocks of ice. She knew his master password perfectly well, because for all these years, they had never kept secrets from each other. Or at least, that was the reality she had firmly believed in. She navigated to his email and initially searched the word Florida. The screen populated with ancient emails from past clients, routine flight confirmations, and a few outdated renovation estimates. Nothing looked definitive. Next, she typed the word Tampa. The results were overwhelming. There were hundreds of project files, supplier invoices, and technical folders. She was on the verge of closing the window entirely when her mind flashed back to the faded letter on the tiny key tag. She typed a new phrase into the search bar: Clearwater Coast. A hidden, encrypted folder miraculously appeared at the very bottom of the directory list. It was labeled Clearwater Coast Projects. Inside, she found sweeping blueprints for a supposed luxury boutique hotel, glossy renderings of Mediterranean-style facades, and several spreadsheet files with names deliberately designed to look excruciatingly boring. One file in particular caught her eye. It was titled sitematerials.log. Laura double-clicked it. The spreadsheet that opened was absolutely not a log of construction materials. It was a meticulously color-coded calendar. There were green cells assigned to Chicago. Orange cells were assigned to Clearwater. Gray cells were designated as transit days. Hovering over some of the dates revealed brief, clinical notes. Noah's birthday party, Victoria's pediatrician appointment, dinner with Chloe, do not call after 10 at night. Laura stopped breathing for several agonizing seconds. Noah, Victoria. Victoria was not a whimsical possibility for their future. She was a living, breathing little girl with doctor appointments, school schedules, and an entire vibrant life unfolding thousands of miles away from Chicago. Laura forced herself to keep digging through the digital debris. She uncovered records of recurring monthly bank transfers. Every single month, exactly on the 3rd of the month, $150 was wired out under the memo line of site supervision expenses. The recipient of these funds was not a construction firm or an independent contractor. It was a private checking account legally tied to a residential lease agreement located in the coastal town of Safety Harbor, just outside Clearwater. She opened a scanned portable document format file and found the exact street address. alongside the names of 2 minor children officially registered as permanent residents. Laura pushed herself back from the desk and stood up, because her body suddenly demanded physical distance from the glowing screen. She walked mechanically to the kitchen, turned on the cold water tap, and held her wrists under the freezing stream. She did not cry. Not yet. There was an emotion brewing inside her that was vastly more powerful than grief. It was the terrifying, suffocating realization of having lived inside a master blueprint that someone else had deceitfully drafted without ever asking for her consent. She marched back to the glowing monitor and opened the final attachment at the bottom of the folder. It was a digitized receipt from that very same exclusive jewelry store on the Gold Coast. The invoice clearly detailed 2 white gold wedding bands. They possessed the exact same metallic composition, the identical wavy line engraved on the inner band. Yet the purchase dates were years apart, and the engraved initials were entirely different. In that quiet room, the final piece of the puzzle snapped violently into place. Andrew had not stumbled into this double life by accident. He had not improvised a single moment of it. He had meticulously commissioned it, piece by piece, like a luxury building project. And just as Laura moved her trembling hand to close the folder, a brand new notification chimed softly in the bottom corner of the screen, originating from Andrew's secondary, hidden email address. The message read, "Chloe is already suspicious. Do not come to Clearwater tonight." Laura read the short sentence twice to ensure her eyes were not betraying her. She did not touch the keyboard to reply. She did not open any further emails to investigate the sender. She simply executed a quick screen capture of the message. She dragged the image file into a brand new, encrypted folder of her own making, and then completely shut down the computer system, doing so with the quiet caution of someone softly closing a door that must not creak. Late that afternoon, Andrew returned to the townhome carrying a small white paper bag from the local pharmacy and wearing a deeply exhausted smile. He softly announced that he had picked up some heavy-duty pain relievers for her, just in case her brutal overnight shift had left her with a migraine. Laura thanked him politely. She watched his every movement with the sharp eyes of a hawk. She observed exactly how he placed his keys face down on the entryway console to hide the tags. She noticed how he placed his mobile phone with the screen pressed firmly against the kitchen island. She saw how he carefully avoided looking directly at the closed door of the home office. Before today, these tiny, insignificant gestures would have completely bypassed her attention. Now, they were blaring sirens. The following morning, Laura formally requested 2 consecutive days off from the hospital administration. She provided no elaborate details to her supervisor, simply stating that she urgently needed to resolve an unexpected family matter. Afterward, she picked up her phone and called Tara, her closest friend, who worked in the hospital's administrative billing department. Tara was a fiercely practical woman. She was the type of friend who never bombarded you with useless questions when she heard the raw agony already present in your voice. "I need to fly down to Florida immediately," Laura said into the receiver, "and I really need you to come with me." Tara did not offer a single platitude or word of unsolicited advice. She merely asked what time their flight was departing. They caught the earliest morning flight out of O'Hare International Airport. Laura carried a thick blue folder securely tucked inside her leather tote bag. It contained the printed pages of the color-coded calendar, the bank transfer receipts, the jewelry store invoice, and the signed lease agreement. Throughout the long journey south, Laura barely spoke a word. She stared blankly out the small oval window, watching the freezing Midwestern clouds gradually give way to the bright, blinding sunshine of the southern coast. Tara sat quietly beside her, occasionally passing her an open bottle of water, never once pushing her to explain the agonizing silence. Upon landing in Tampa, they rented a modest, inconspicuous sedan. The navigation system guided them directly into Safety Harbor, routing them down a picturesque, quiet street lined with blooming bougainvillea bushes and the faint, salty scent of the nearby Gulf of Mexico hanging in the humid air. The house was a charming 2-story white structure with bright green window shutters and a small, brightly colored children's bicycle resting against the front porch railing. Laura killed the engine and sat in the stagnant silence of the car. "Do not step out yet," Tara whispered softly, placing a comforting hand on Laura's arm. There was no need to step out. Roughly 40 minutes later, the heavy wooden front door finally swung open. Chloe emerged first, her right arm still heavily bound in a medical splint from the car crash. Right behind her bounded a little boy, perhaps 5 years old, with dark, messy hair, wearing a bright red soccer jersey and clutching a worn leather ball under his arm. Trailing slightly behind him was a tiny girl with light brown hair, pulled back in a haphazard ponytail, fiercely hugging a ragged cloth doll against her chest. Chloe leaned down awkwardly, struggling to adjust the little girl's lightweight cardigan with her one good hand. She then planted a soft kiss on the top of the boy's head and pulled the front door shut, moving with the distinct, clumsy frustration of someone trying to manage the chaos of motherhood entirely one-handed. Looking at the scene, there was no extravagant luxury. There was no grand, provocative display of a mistress living the high life. There was only a visibly exhausted mother, operating on practically zero sleep, simply trying to get her children to school on time. Sitting in the driver's seat, Laura felt the fiery, blinding rage inside her chest suddenly shift its shape. The anger did not evaporate, but it crystallized. It became sharper, colder, and far more precise. "That little girl is Victoria," Laura murmured softly into the quiet car, barely registering that she was speaking out loud. Tara looked over at her friend with deep sorrow in her eyes, but wisely chose not to ask any questions. Across the street, the little girl tilted her head up toward Chloe and muttered something Laura could not possibly hear through the glass. Chloe immediately smiled down at her with a remarkably pure, unblemished tenderness, the exact kind of instinctual, loving response any devoted mother would give, even when her own body was throbbing with pain. In that single fleeting gesture, Laura understood a profound truth that eradicated her final lingering doubts. Chloe was absolutely not acting like a victorious woman who had stolen another woman's life. Chloe was acting exactly like someone who was also trapped inside a beautiful, elaborately constructed lie. They boarded a return flight to Chicago late that very same afternoon. While cruising at 30,000 feet, Laura unzipped her tote bag and laid the blue folder completely open on the small plastic tray table. She began organizing the printed documents in strict chronological order. First, the receipt for the white gold ring. Next, the meticulously coded calendar. Then, the long list of bank transfers. And finally, placed right on top, the captured image of the email message. "Chloe is already suspicious. Do not come to Clearwater tonight." As soon as the plane touched down, she made a phone call to Megan Sullivan, a highly respected family law attorney who had been privately recommended by a senior surgeon at the hospital. Laura explained only the absolute necessities over the phone. Megan was a professional. She did not gasp or dramatize the situation. Instead, she firmly requested physical copies of every document, exact dates, bank routing numbers, and above all else, absolute, unbroken silence until they could construct an impenetrable legal strategy. That evening back in Lincoln Park, when Andrew casually mentioned that he would be flying down to Tampa on Friday morning, Laura simply watched him pour expensive red wine into 2 crystal glasses. "Of course," she replied with a perfectly smooth voice. "You really need to keep a close eye on that boutique hotel project." Andrew smiled, clearly relieved that she was not pressing for details. At 16 minutes past 11 at night, long after Andrew had fallen into a deep sleep in their bedroom, Laura quietly stepped out into the living room. She pulled the door shut with absolute silence and dialed Chloe's personal number. The phone rang agonizingly for 4 long cycles. Finally, a heavy, tired voice answered. "Yes?" Laura took a massive, shuddering breath. "I am Laura Henderson. I am the triage nurse who treated you in the emergency room the other night. I urgently need to speak with you regarding Andrew Mitchell." On the other end of the cellular connection, there was a silence so profound and heavy that Laura genuinely believed Chloe had dropped the phone or ended the call. Then she heard a sharp, contained intake of breath, the distinct scrape of a wooden chair sliding across a floor, and the soft click of a door being shut tightly. "What exactly do you have to tell me about Andrew?" Chloe finally asked, her voice trembling with guarded fear. Laura deliberately chose not to launch into a barrage of accusations. She had learned through years of delivering terrible medical news that the truth, when hurled like a jagged rock, can permanently shatter the person who desperately needs to catch it. She spoke very slowly and methodically. She calmly recounted the chaotic night in the emergency room, the locked mobile phone, the contact name explicitly saved as her husband, the wallpaper photo featuring the little girl, and the distinctive white gold wedding band. Then, she quietly stated the exact street address of the house in Safety Harbor. Chloe did not attempt to interrupt her until she heard her own house numbers spoken aloud. "How could you possibly know where my children and I live?" Chloe demanded. "Because Andrew actively pays the monthly lease for that property from a checking account that also appears on my own household financial records," Laura answered steadily. "And why exactly do I have copies of those records?" The introduction of the word copies completely altered the atmospheric pressure of the conversation. Chloe began to ask tiny, incredibly specific questions, sounding much like a person tapping the ice with a stick to ensure it will hold their weight before taking another step. She asked for Andrew's middle name. She asked for the official corporate name of his architectural firm in downtown Chicago. She asked about the specific luxury brand of watch he constantly wore on his left wrist. She asked about the faint, silvery scar running across his right hand. Laura answered every single question with absolute precision. She did not provide the answers to forcefully bend Chloe to her will, but rather to ensure the other woman was not left completely alone in the dark, facing an impossible reality. Then, Chloe uttered a sentence that made Laura sit up completely straight on the living room sofa, her blood running cold. "He told me that you were his bitter ex-wife," Chloe whispered. "He told me you viciously refused to sign the divorce papers because the failed fertility treatments had completely ruined your mental health. He strictly warned me never to contact you, saying that you were unstable and might try to hurt our family." Laura squeezed her eyes shut, feeling a fresh wave of nausea wash over her. Andrew had not merely hidden an entirely separate existence. He had weaponized Laura's deepest, most private trauma and used her devastating grief as his personal alibi. The very next morning, Chloe boarded an early flight out of Tampa, landing in Chicago shortly after breakfast. She firmly declined Laura's polite offer to pick her up from the arrivals terminal. Instead, they agreed to meet at a quiet, unassuming coffee shop tucked away near the hospital at exactly 10:15. Chloe walked through the glass doors, clutching a thick brown envelope against her chest. Her arm was still awkwardly immobilized by the medical splint, and her face carried the unmistakable, hollowed-out look of someone who had not slept a wink but had made the conscious decision not to physically collapse. They did not hug when they met. To do so would have felt entirely unnatural and performative. They simply sat down opposite one another at a small corner table, ordered 2 warm lattes, and placed their mobile phones face down on the wooden surface. Laura unclasped her blue folder. Chloe unsealed her brown envelope. What unfolded next involved absolutely no shouting or dramatic tears. In many ways, it was far worse. It was the agonizing, methodical reconstruction of 2 completely parallel realities. On the 14th of February, Andrew had enjoyed a romantic dinner with Laura at an upscale restaurant in Lincoln Park, gifting her a beautiful, rare book of poetry. That very same evening, he had sent Chloe an elaborate text message claiming he was trapped in an emergency meeting with foreign investors. On the 3rd of May, Chloe produced a joyful photograph of Andrew blowing out birthday candles alongside little Noah. On that exact same afternoon, Laura possessed a text from Andrew complaining that his return flight from Tampa had been terribly delayed by bad weather. In late July, when Laura had stumbled out of the fertility clinic, weeping uncontrollably in the parking garage, Andrew had held her tightly in his arms for 20 solid minutes. Later that very night, he had typed a message to Chloe reading, "This nightmare is almost entirely over. Very soon we will be a proper family with no shadows hanging over us." Chloe gripped her ceramic mug tightly with both hands, her knuckles turning white. "I genuinely believed every single word he said," she whispered, making no attempt to defend her own pride. "I honestly believed he was just fighting to be with me and my children." Laura did not respond immediately. She looked closely at Chloe's heavy splint, the dark, bruised exhaustion hanging heavy under her eyes, and she finally understood that the shame of this situation did not belong to either of them. Sitting right there in the coffee shop, they jointly called Megan Sullivan, the attorney. Megan strictly advised them not to confront Andrew just yet. The legal team still required exact dates, official bank statements, signed contracts, and any written correspondence where he explicitly acknowledged covering expenses, booking flights, or making long-term promises. Megan also provided Chloe with a direct referral to a ruthless family law attorney based in Florida who specialized in paternity establishment, primary custody, and aggressive child support claims. Right before they finally stood up to part ways, Chloe reached deep into her handbag and pulled out a slightly creased photograph. It showed Andrew standing on a bright, sunny beach, carrying Noah high upon his broad shoulders, while little Victoria clung tightly to his leg. On the back of the photo, written in Andrew's unmistakable handwriting, was a single sentence. "For the day when we never have to hide again." Laura did not utter a single word in response. She simply took the photograph and slid it into a clear plastic sleeve alongside the mounting pile of financial documents. That afternoon, upon returning to the empty townhome in Lincoln Park, Laura calmly packed a small overnight suitcase. She carefully packed her identification cards, her personal banking ledger, her private medical records, the antique jewelry she had inherited from her mother, and a small, resilient lavender plant she had grown on the balcony. Then, she printed out a large, full-color copy of the color-coded spreadsheet and laid it dead center on their beautifully made bed. Right on top of the paper, she placed her white gold wedding band. Just below the ring, she left a handwritten note containing only one sentence. "I know exactly how you divided my life." Andrew discovered the note at exactly 1 minute past 9 at night. Laura knew the exact moment it happened because her mobile phone instantly began vibrating aggressively across the wooden dining table in Tara's tiny guest apartment, which was where she had wisely chosen to seek refuge. Initially, there were 3 frantic calls back-to-back. Then came a barrage of 5 desperate text messages. Those were quickly followed by lengthy voicemails that Laura completely ignored. By the 10th incoming call, she powered the device down entirely. This was not an act of fear, it was a calculated strategy. Megan Sullivan had been exceptionally clear during their consultation earlier that afternoon. There were to be no private screaming matches. There were to be no emotional explanations offered without legal witnesses present. Under no circumstances was Laura to grant Andrew the opportunity to twist his immense guilt into a manipulative, sentimental conversation. The hard evidence was already perfectly organized and legally bound. All that remained was simply stepping back and allowing Andrew to reveal his true colors when the illusion of control was violently ripped away from him. When Laura finally powered her phone, back on the following morning, the screen displayed 34 missed calls. The very last text message he sent read, "You are blowing this completely out of proportion. We can easily fix this without dragging lawyers into it." Laura did not reply. She simply forwarded the screenshot directly to Megan. At precisely 11 in the morning, Andrew marched right through the main entrance of the hospital. Laura had just finished applying fresh bandages to a patient and was quietly washing her hands when a younger nurse nervously pushed open the door. "Someone is asking for you at the main nurse's station," she said timidly. "He says he is your husband and it is an emergency." Laura grabbed a paper towel and dried her hands with maddening slowness. She walked out into the busy main lobby, flanked closely by Tara and the senior shift supervisor. Andrew was standing near the admission desk, his heavy wool coat hanging open, deep purple shadows bruised under his eyes, and a thick black leather portfolio clutched tightly under his arm. The moment he spotted her, he attempted to deploy his trademark charming smile, but the expression fractured and died long before it could ever reach his eyes. "Laura, please, just give me 5 minutes to explain," he begged, stepping forward. "My attorney will be the one speaking with you from now on," she replied, her voice echoing coldly off the tile walls. He aggressively closed the distance between them, dropping his voice to a harsh, threatening whisper. "You have absolutely no idea what you are doing. If you drag all this into the light, you are going to completely destroy those poor children too." Laura felt the cruel weight of the verbal punch, but she refused to step backward. "I was not the one who decided to hide them in the dark," she countered evenly. Andrew cast a panicked glance around the busy lobby. There were far too many observant people watching. There were far too many white coats, far too much unvarnished reality closing in on him. He leaned in even closer. "Chloe does not understand what is happening. She is just confused," he hissed. "And so are you." Standing just a few feet away, Tara discreetly raised her mobile phone, capturing the audio of the entire pathetic exchange. That very same afternoon, down in sunny Florida, a massive bouquet of expensive red roses was delivered to Chloe's doorstep. Tucked inside the flowers was a small, elegant card. "Do not let her vicious jealousy destroy our beautiful family." Chloe did not throw the extravagant flowers in the trash. Instead, she methodically photographed the arrangement from multiple angles, slipped the card into a protective plastic sleeve, and immediately dialed her newly retained attorney. Within 48 hours, 2 massive legal bombs were officially detonated. Laura's aggressive divorce petition was formally filed in the Chicago courts, demanding a brutal division of assets based on financial infidelity. Simultaneously, Chloe's ruthless lawsuit for paternity establishment, full primary custody, and maximum child support was officially lodged in the Florida legal system. Acting with flawless coordination, Megan Sullivan sent a formal legal inquiry to James Taylor, Andrew's senior business partner at the firm, explicitly demanding a full accounting of all corporate funds tied to the Clearwater Coast projects. James Taylor's forensic audit exposed nearly $96 that Andrew had embezzled through fake expenses, inflated reimbursements, and disguised transfers over 2 years. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Andrew surrendered his ownership stake to avoid criminal prosecution, but the scandal still destroyed his professional reputation and cost the firm major clients. At the same time, Laura cooperated fully with attorneys while continuing her demanding hospital work, refusing to celebrate and instead focusing on the truth. DNA tests confirmed Andrew was the father of Chloe's 2 children, and during settlement negotiations, Laura insisted that any agreement begin with a written admission of his deception. 9 months later, the divorce was finalized. Andrew accepted financial responsibility and public accountability. Chloe secured legal protections and child support for her children, and the legal system forced the hidden reality into the open, even if it could not erase the emotional damage. Returning to her home, Laura slowly reclaimed her life by removing reminders of Andrew, rebuilding daily routines, and finding peace in small moments, while exchanging hopeful messages with Chloe about the children's future. She later formed a quiet friendship with rehabilitation specialist Stephen Vance, appreciating his honesty and reliability without rushing into romance. Standing on her balcony months later and watching a once-neglected lavender plant bloom again, Laura realized that healing meant no longer needing to hide from the truth. She understood that betrayal forces people to question memories and trust, but another person's lies can never define their worth or become their fault. True dignity comes through patiently uncovering facts, accepting help, seeking justice without bitterness, and choosing to rebuild rather than remain trapped by unanswered questions. Real recovery begins when a person stops asking why they were betrayed and instead focuses on creating a future grounded in honesty, self-respect, and lasting inner peace.